Welcome back, I am the OpinionBox, and as you may have already noticed, I have been inactive for a year now, and for that I apologize. So today I bring you my first video of a series of videos that I will attempt to produce over the summer and over the next year. I will discuss many different topics, and if you so wish, you may suggest topics for discussion by simply commenting or sending me a private message. In this episode, I'll be discussing the Anita Sarkeesian Tropes vs. Women series in detail, as well as discussing feminism and sexism. And please stop tormenting the woman. She's done nothing to deserve hatred and threats. I don't care if they're not serious. Or that it's the internet. It's to be expected. I call bullshit. There's not a good reason for doing it. It's immature and it disgusts me. And I try to see the good in people. Jeez. All she tried to do was to voice her own opinion, and when I say opinion, I mean mostly opinion. However, it did lead her advantage for having a reason for closing comments, which I don't find too agreeable, but this complaint has been spoken too often, so I shall not dwell. Well, I feel I shall begin, but first, a short disclaimer.
Since I'm a man, I cannot account for any bias expressed for or against aspects of either sexism or feminism, or any contrary opinions to mine. Even though I am strictly speaking a feminist myself, I feel the definitions have been skewed to online misconceptions, and therefore I'd refer to myself as being an equalist above all. In this video I shall attempt to maintain a mostly neutral approach as always, so please do not hold a grudging opinion against mine for that sole purpose should you disagree. I shall also attempt not to take quotes out of context, because that shows legitimacy of representation. If any such are spotted, please let me know. This does not mean that my opinion should be more valid and or above any other opinion, but I wish for it to be of consideration and discussion. Since I am discussing a quite sensitive topic, I apologize in beforehand if you feel insulted, discriminated, or alienated by anything in this video. Any such incidents, I swear, are entirely accidental and not my intent, so please, if you may, keep the comment section clean and on the subject, and please contribute to conversation.
With that out of the way, I can begin. Oh wait, I have to give prior warning. Beware, this video contains spoilers from numerous games. In this video I will discuss the first part of the series. I myself am a very avid gamer, and I might go as far as to consider myself a hardcore gamer, so on that level I will consider myself equally as qualified as Anita. While I agree with Anita on many aspects of her arguments, there is a common trend of self-proclaimed interpretation of certain factors as opposed to representing both sides to an argument. This, which in part 1 was less prevalent, but worsened in part 2 and got even worse in the final part. In short, I'm saying her argumentation is one-sided, with a concerning lack of alternate interpretations, which I would much prefer to have. On her Twitter, she stated that My Damsel in Distress miniseries doesn't feature more heroic female characters in games as examples because they are not damsels in distress, which is a bogus reason because it allows for misrepresentation. If you are only told about one specific thing that happens in a medium, then surely you will get the message. But if it is put in no other context as here, then the actual scale of the damage isn't completely clear and the credibility is reduced. It's a bit like marketing. Show the things that support the appliance you're selling, but don't talk about the things you don't work. It sells, that it does, but is it right to hide certain things? Certainly not. I believe it was said best by one of the comments from the Twitter post in question, a guy by the name of Russ McLoyne, please say I pronounced that right, who said my thesis is blue is the best color, so I only have to present the color blue. And that is why balanced arguments need to feature reasons why blue is the best color based upon the shortcomings of the other colors, so to speak. While I still have to say that there is a lack of female protagonists, they still do exist and in recent progression are increasing in numbers. When she talks about Dinosaur Planet, she mentions that Crystal could have been one of the two playable characters, the other which was male. And yes, that could have been cool, but the move towards Star Wars isn't a move of sexism, but as a matter of money and financial success. Being given a famous character by the big N is a huge privilege, and could make any game sell. Remember that Rare still had huge creative freedom. They only accommodated to make it a Star Fox game. In other words, Shigeru had no actual power of development, and Nintendo only actually published the game. Just to correct a slight mistake, Anita stated, over the next 2 years he and Nintendo did just that. They rewrote and redesigned the game. Which just isn't true. Miyamoto-san was credited as a producer in the game, that he was, but he has during a few interviews admitted that he was not involved in the making of the game, because he had faith in Rare. This means that the same people that made the first edition rewrote the second. What does this prove? Nothing really, but I just didn't enjoy the poor research done here. Either that or I'm reading things wrong, but I doubt it. And on the topic of the fact that Crystal becomes a damsel, yeah, she does. And I too agree that this was a shame. However, the cheesy saxophone music is clearly intended to be an ironic joke. Just sneering over the fact that a male can somehow be attracted to a female of the same species isn't very analytical. I mean, how many foxes do you see around the Star Fox universe anyways? Like one family, the McLeods, that's it! Otherwise, yeah, blah blah, she's a story, excuse for gameplay. Sure. But the next statement is a bit awry. To add insult to injury, Fox is now using her magic staff to fight his way through the game to save her. And this is where I get to say, did you even play the first 5 seconds of the game? The cutscene even shows Crystal telling Fox, take care of my staff and it'll take care of you. In other words, not really adding insult to injury, because it's clear that because she was trapped, the least she could do, and did, was to offer up, willingly, a powerful weapon to Fox. And last time I checked, that's not really adding insult to anything. But she lost it, and yet she had the common decency to ensure that she had a pre-recorded voicemail, just in case anything goes wrong, so she can give some random stranger a weapon to help her. Why don't we just call it plot ninjutsu, or whatever the hell? It's really all the ordinary B-movie plot points. Alternately, she just went all telepathic on his ass when he took it. Who knows what really happened, because the game doesn't really make that very clear. Her next section is but a huge list of movies, cartoons, and series since way back in the 1900s, where the damsel trope has been used to death. Not really much of interest, and not much to refute either, because we already know that the early 1900s was a disgusting sexist mess. Oh hey, that's a movie with a damsel, sure, yeah, I see, sorry, how does this illustrate your point again? I know it's to do with the history and stuff, but it does not really illustrate any meaningful points other than an unnecessary history lesson as opposed to actually talking about the modern representation. Just saying. I can't really say much about this because it's true. It's true that Jumpman saves Pauline from Donkey Kong. It's true that the trope used to be and is still used like a fallback, as well as to uphold a tradition of storytelling and nostalgia of fairy tales. We know, and yes, it would be great to see more games without the trope. But it's not necessarily hurting the representation of women in the way you might think, Anita. In fact, I don't believe it is at all. I just think it's tiring to see the same thing repeated over and over again. Now, when she begins to talk about Peach, all is well and true, spare that I can hear klaxons blaring in the background for one specific point. The rest are all fine, actually, keep that up. She says that Peach does of course appear in many spin-offs, such as the Mario Party, Mario Sports, Smash Brothers. However, all of these spin-offs fall well outside the core Super Mario series of platformers. No. What are you talking about? You're talking about the representation of female characters in games. What the hell does the core series have to do with anything? That's just like adding asterisks to how you want to present it, not to mention that Mario Kart Wii outsold all Mario Wii games separately. A game where Peach is playable beat those where only Mario is playable. Does that not make it significant? Of course it does! You just wish not to discuss it because it doesn't present your color blue. Please, Anita. As in-depth analysis involves checking over facts from both sides, I can admit that the trope is used a lot, but it's incredibly difficult to analyze your work without going back slightly on my word of neutrality. It would be much easier if I already had the infrastructure of a balanced argument down, but since I don't, it almost feels like playing the devil's advocate, or something synonymous to that. I feel like I need to provide an opposing argument to every point simply because you have presented none for yourself. This, by the way, is why the words just keep falling onto the page. But let us move on to her discussion concerning the representation of female characters within the Zelda games. While relevant to the trope are much more advanced examples of the sort, so I will explain some minor discrepancies to show a slight lack of research shown in her videos. In fact, I shall simply cherry pick a bit. Now, I'm going to put it out that Zelda did have her own adventure. In fact, she had two alongside another featuring Link on the CDI. While these games may be terrible, they are Zelda games. And again, she says, not in the core series. And again, I must stress that this does not matter. She is still represented in other games, and they still mean something too. But enough of this. Let's start by discussing Zelda from Ocarina of Time. As she said, Zelda awaits capture for the first 3/4 of the game, which already is not true. She is captured about 2 hours from the end of a 30-hour game, just to be a pedant here. But therein lies my first issue. While Anita does say that as Sheik, Zelda is a useful character, aiding Link throughout. But what she does not discuss is the fact that without Sheik, Link would have never reached Ganondorf. So in turn, if I were to make a one-sided interpretation, the presence of Zelda as Sheik throughout the game providing the male hero with essential help that death or otherwise would have rendered progress impossible disempowers men as they cannot act for themselves without the aid of a female guide. Yeah, that wasn't so hard at all, was it? Of course, this deduction is bogus because it's a fallacy. It doesn't actually prove anything in the same way as many of her self-interpretations about its empowerment of women fall flat. But since the damsel plot device is very common, I would have to say yes, the damsel in distress is one such trope that does show, shall we say, inequality between males and females, of course. And yes, it is true that capture may well strip power from a female character who were otherwise capable, but the same would apply to any other male captive. I'd give you that, Anita, though, but a word of advice is to discuss both sides. As an argument for the capture of female characters, it is valid, but as an argument for the overall representation of female characters in games, it shows but a minimal proportion. What is odd here is that even when we know Sheik is Zelda, the characteristics for her character is by Anita described to be masculine, at least from what I can deduce from her statement. As soon as she transforms back into her more stereotypically feminine form of Princess Zelda. Now, this to me is a bit perplexing. Is there anything wrong with a so-called feminine character? I mean, sure, that just speaks for diversity, but I guess if Anita had to decide, all females would inhibit masculine characteristics, even though one does not need to appear masculine to be powerful. I guess the problem she has is that when Zelda appeared as feminine, she was kidnapped. But that isn't really relevant, is it? She was still female as Sheik anyways, so surely this point isn't actually that relevant. I mean, Samus pulled that off very well in Metroid. How'd everyone going? Just to carry on my point here, Anita spoke about almost all 3D Zelda games, but stopped at Phantom Hourglass. Why would you not discuss spirit tracks? Is it because Zelda is present whilst in spirit form, and again is such a character that without her the hero would be unable to progress? Is it maybe because throughout the entire game, Link takes orders from her and in addition is saved from death at numerous points? I think you missed the point of providing a balanced interpretation of the representation of women in games, because I would genuinely rather hear that story, even if it's just a remake of your series. However, Anita then declares that the belief that women are somehow a naturally weaker gender is a deeply ingrained, socially constructed myth, which of course is completely false, but the notion is reinforced and perpetuated when women are continuously portrayed as frail, fragile, and vulnerable creatures. And this is where we need to go take a biology lesson. There are many principal factors that differentiate females and males. One such key thing is testosterone. Testosterone is an anabolic steroid hormone that is secreted by not only the testes but also the adrenal gland. It promotes muscle and bone growth, and since only small amounts are secreted by the adrenal gland, and the fact that women don't have testes, no shit, right? This is one reason why males on average will be stronger and taller, as they have much increased testosterone levels. But of course, this is not the only factor, but it is one of the many biological differences that affect physical differences. So no, in this situation you are spouting lies, Anita. Why do we have a split Olympic Games, people? To provide equal opportunity for success between both genders? And why is this? Because biologically men are on average stronger than women. It is an indisputable fact, and it's got nothing to do with sexism because it is nothing we can do anything about, really. If we look at the world records in numerous sports, such as the 100-meter sprint, and compare times between male and female competitors, we find that men's record is 9.58 seconds and the women's record is 10.49 seconds. Still not convinced? How about javelin, where the men's record is 9.48 meters and the women's record is 72.28? Just one more. What about the marathons, where men's record is 2 hours, 3 minutes, 38 seconds, and the women's record is 2 hours, 15 minutes, 25 seconds? And these are all endurance and strength-based events. This does not mean that all women are weaker than men, but instead, if we quote Wikipedia, most males are taller and stronger than females, but an individual female could be taller and or stronger than an individual male. These differences and their extent vary across societies. And this is also one reason why, on average, there are more representations of strong male characters in video games than there are females. This is not to say that you cannot have strong women, because that is false. And I guess, just to prove a further point, let's discuss the differences in the fight-or-flight responses between males and females in real life. Males tend to be receptive to adrenaline, and therefore will lean towards fight-or-flight response. But research has shown that females secrete more of a hormone called oxytocin, which in turn promotes a tend and befriend response over the fight or flight. This means that biologically females will be less inclined to fight or flight in a capture situation than males, and therefore, because of simple biology, are more likely to remain captured befriending their captor, in a bizarre example of Stockholm Syndrome, which research has shown to affect females more than males as well. So what is the point of all this? Surely games don't need to fall into the ranks of reality. Surely we don't need to enforce biological irrefutability onto a fantasy world. Well, yeah, we don't. But this is one reason why female protagonists are less prominent, and why females are captured more often, and why they don't escape capture as often. And here is where I say it's not really sexist to just represent the average gender differences in games and certain tendencies for one gender over another, because it's true. Biology! But let us move on. But this is where I have to give some criticism to her choice of topic. Damsel in distress is a poor choice for the representation of women in video games, because they make up a minimal amount of all the female characters in video games. Just like the color blue is a tiny band from the whole spectrum of colors. While they exist as a stereotyped way to drive a plot forwards, it does take lots of olden myths, tales and historical events into account. The truth of the matter is that even now there are more abductions of females than males in the real world, while on the other hand a larger proportion of female victims that are found are usually found alive, as opposed to male victims that are more often than not found dead. There are also more incidents of domestic violence against women done by men. These are all issues that should be dealt with in real life. The fact that games draw influence from the state of current affairs and modes is certain to be a reason why the damsel trope still exists as it is, and it most certainly does not condone such behavior, but also because of stereotyping and the differentiation of male and female gender roles. But since we live in a society where gender roles and primitive displays of violence are not necessary, the empowerment of women in games is not impossible, and in my opinion should be promoted so that there are more female protagonists, and also more female antagonists. Hey, you can't ask for one but not the other. That's a misrepresentation of your equality policies. And because of her choice of topic, it leaves room for Anita to simply express all negative things about that one trope, many of which are true, currently disregarding the role of females in any other role other than the so-called damsel, as well as putting forward complete disregard toward any female characters whom hold important roles. Just imagine if I put forward a video talking about the misandry of video games against the dumb comic relief characters found in so many video games that most often are male and sometimes even act as the main character. If I did that, you'd all think I was crazy. But you'd have to give it a fair point. Quite often when you have the strong male heroes, they are often not very intelligent, whereas female characters are more often portrayed as the intelligent counterpart, even though intelligence is pretty much 50-50 in, let's say, exam results. Now, do we deem this misandry? No, because it's just a cliche and men shouldn't be offended by it. It's just a character that just so happened to be male portrayed in just that way. It's not directed towards males and middle finger, but again, may relate back to something like the village fool or the drunkard from old fairy tales, who were always male. It's just so it is. Not because they want to be misandrous. Why not just make all characters androgynous? Then we'd have no problems, right? Now, to use some examples of female characters that are empowered to an equal or greater extent to the main playable male character, and without their presence would prevent the progress of the main playable male character. Midna from Twilight Princess not only saves Link as a wolf, but is portrayed as a very powerful and influential character. While she may be downed by Zant initially, the same really goes for Link. She's another character whom without the hero would be powerless to progress. But then again, she is defeated by Ganondorf, but that does not strictly speaking require rescuing by just a male character. A male character whose power is partially borrowed from the Master Sword, you know, the only thing that can really kill Ganondorf. Were she able to wield it, that would be a different matter. And what about Alika from the 2008 Prince of Persia game? Again, she's another character which without her, the hero could not possibly progress on his own. Also, you'd be dead. While Elika sacrifices herself in healing the land, this does not disempower her at all. It is a heroic deed, an act of martyrdom, nor does it put the choice in the male character's hands when she lives or dies. Alex Vance is another such character, and while she may be put to harm at one point, she is never the damsel, and again helps the main protagonist in such ways that otherwise progress would have been impossible without her help. And just to turn the tables, Crystal in Star Fox Assault is not a damsel at any point in the game, and plays an equally important role as the other two side main male characters, who again aid the main playable character in such a way that without their help progress would have been impossible. And just to name a few more, Kat from Halo Reach and Luca from Chrono Trigger. And to save time, I shall just name a few female main protagonists. Zoe from Left 4 Dead, Shushan from Darkness 2, Joanna Dark from Perfect Dark, Faith from Mirror's Edge, pretty much one from every single Resident Evil game, Lara Croft in every Tomb Raider, Nilin from Remember Me, Lilith from Borderlands, Jade from Beyond Good and Evil, and every single game where you can customize your character. And the list just goes on and on and on. Sure, there are fewer main female characters, but it's not a necessity for the numbers to be equal. It's true that more males play these games, so the developers want to cater to their demographic to support their main audience. If the tables were turned, the same would happen. And it is not debatable that the number of games featuring female protagonists have gone up recently as well. And while we're at it, just to put this into context, if we have a 50-50 split male to female applicants to a job whereby there are 100 places, if all women or all men applicants are more suited to the job, they should have it. We should not have to enforce a 50-50 divide between males and females if there just happens to be well-suited applicants of only one gender, because then people with better qualifications would not get a job simply because they're filling a quota. The same would go for games. There should not be a necessity for developers to develop a game with a female protagonist. There is just no reasonable reason to force them to do so. They have complete creative freedom. We should not be able to force them to make the protagonist a different gender simply because there are fewer of them. Now me, I like the idea of a female protagonist. I don't think that we have the right to demand more of them though. If a developer wants to have a female protagonist, so be it. The same goes for the other way around. Another citation reads, "It is a sad fact that a large percentage of the world's population still clings to the deeply sexist belief that women as a group need to be sheltered, protected, and taken care of by men." First of all, large percentage can mean anything, and sure, it is a problem in religious Eastern countries, specifically Islamic countries. And it is a huge problem, but throwing non-specific percentages, oh not even that, isn't really helping any argument, because it goes over what you think rather than what you know. It is also sad how many women exist that willingly feel the comfort and extort the fact that there are men willing to work for them, pay for their spending while they live a calm and sheltered life. It goes both ways, does it not? If we take the reverse of the argument, which is worse, wanting to protect another gender or expecting to be protected because of your gender? If you put it like that, it doesn't really sound that crystal clear anymore now, does it? Now, I cannot claim all women are like this in the same way that you cannot claim that all men are like that, because we just cannot know. Either way, I know that I and many other players agree that the damsel trope is severely overused. However, this does not mean that it cannot be done right, like in Shadow of the Colossus. In fact, Anita also states this, in a way. I am not saying that all games using the damsel in distress as a plot device are automatically sexist or have no value, which is a rather just statement, which sadly is swiftly followed by damsel in distress trope as a recurring trend does help to normalize extremely toxic, patronizing and paternalistic attitudes about women. And as I have explained before, this is just not the case. It does not usurp men above women in everyday society. It does not normalize the behaviors. People who are sexist will stay sexist, and those who are not will remain such. While in the light of such, shall we say, light-hearted storytelling, it's well worth mentioning the fact that these developers are not out to get you. They are not wittingly and willingly using this to throw down women, nor are they trying to promote patriarchal influences, to suggest such as digging too deep into things. These people want to make a game that can make a profit in a competitive market. not to ill-represent women. While this does not prevent them from relying on an ancient stereotype to give a plot point that we can recognize with, it is simply an easy way out, or simply following on a tradition in the case of Mario. The notion that people are so easily corrupted by interactive media is an excessive fallacy. In fact, Anita herself even says so in the second part. Likewise, engaging with these games is not going to magically transform players into raging sexists, causing quite the contradiction. Either that, or simply just a rectification. But this is still followed by cultural influence works in much more subtle and complicated ways. However, media narratives do have a powerful cultivation effect, helping to shape cultural attitudes and opinions, which is a much more reasonable way of putting it, as the media can have a well-placed effect upon a population. Take for instance Fiji after the introduction of television, whereby the rather generous body mass of the women, which was the social norm prior, took a turn due to viewing of the new Western modes, which promoted mass anorexia as the culture of Fiji and the rest of the world clashed. Then again, these examples might not be as comparable, but it does show that the media can have a huge impact on opinions, which runs to her credit quite well. However, the problem here is that if this were the case, then surely we would not be progressing forward much. Things have changed a lot during the last 100 years, and equality between men and women is so much closer than it was before. To suggest that the use now, after the continuous use of the same trope during this 100-year period, actually normalizes such behavior against women is preposterous, as the obvious improvement of gender-based attitudes over the years. Blame books, blame radio, blame TV, blame games, it's all the same, really. While it is true that certain specific individuals may be coaxed into something, these individuals are equally as few as those who are coaxed into violence, basically non-existent compared to the population. That's not to say they don't exist, for they surely do. Now, to return back to another self-interpretation, for a cause to quote. So the damsel trope typically makes men the subject of the narrative while relegating women to the objects. This is a form of objectification because as objects, damseled women are being acted upon, most often being reduced to a prize to be won or a treasure to be found or a goal to be achieved. Now, this is like reading an English textbook. This could have oh so many other interpretations that could fit almost any hypothesis other than the one Anita is cherry-picking for. Instead of a juxtaposing argument, she talks only for one side. If we reverse the roles and the male is the captured one, would we still call the same argument into play? To you? Does that mean now that because a woman is a subject, that's alright? Because now the independent female character can show her mettle as opposed to a male character? And when it comes to prize to be won, if any ruling royalty is captured in the game, then the rescue is almost always to restore the ruling power to the throne, and to restore law and order, and prevent disarray. Think about it, Mario never gets more than cake. But due to watching Zero Punctuation recently, cake. It could be code for something. I kid. But still, Mario does not win anything from it. He's a plumber, and he still probably gets paid terribly. So the act of saving the princess to restore order is an act of selflessness. That also goes for Link in most Zelda games. So again, different interpretations are key to a balanced argument. It's okay to admit your initial hypothesis wasn't what you concluded, it just makes things worse to try and elude specific details and attempt to interpret things just in a different light to make it fit. I mean, I could also be wrong. I get it. It's overused, but that does not objectify whoever is captured. It, in my opinion, makes them a second subject of focus, a second character that holds importance to the characters present in the plot, whether they are male, female, princesses, or princesses acting as a hero or a captive. It really does not matter. Keep adding asterisks and expectations, and I think you will find only a very few select games actually fulfill such a position that this really negative aspect of the trope can be fully rectified. One such may be Double Dragon for the NES. However, in games like Mirror's Edge, because both the hero and damsel are female characters, this entire thing falls apart, as such situations are presumably fine. Same for games where men save men. And after changing the formula around, we find that only the male saving the female is considered a problem. But why is this? You say that this is because it reinforces negative female stereotypes, but surely the juxtaposing situation should be equally as bad then, no? If you want gender equality, both must be taken equally as seriously. and therefore they should not be taken seriously at all, because the core of the damsel is not remotely offensive. Even female authors who proclaim themselves as feminists enjoy writing books about a female main character that requires rescuing aid from a male character. To quote an excessive cliché, stereotypically women enjoy having a knight in shining armor to rely on. In one way, one could, if interpreted badly, say that the damsel is but using the male hero even when in a situation where they could have escaped. Such a character is Fiona from the Shrek series, and then again she was fairly indoctrinated to the idea initially by her parents, but that didn't prevent DreamWorks from making her a badass. I feel as if I'm dancing around the subject here, and that is because there is really no simple way to explain that. Even when a person is captured, they are not necessarily objectified. It goes certain degrees before maybe this holds true, but in most modern games using the damsel, it is no longer the case. In old arcade games, where popping quarters, the story was not paramount, and therefore was, as you say, the hero's fight to retrieve his stolen property, then provides lazy justification for the actual gameplay, because that is all it is, an excuse to make you keep playing the game and earn the money. And because most players are male, most heroes are male. I feel like I've finished discussing part 1 of a series. While I have to agree that many of her points are valid, a personal opinion of mine is that I have nothing against an increase of female protagonists, and more creative stories than this stereotypical damsel. But on the topic of protagonists, to reiterate, this is not something we can demand from developers. We can ask for it, sure, but it's not something we should control. In simple terms, if developers want to make a protagonist be either gender, let them. It's not that difficult, just to say, do whatever you want. This has been the Opinion Box, and this video took a lot longer to make than I thought it would. But hey, hope you enjoyed. See you next time.